Help support Name Explain by liking this video, leaving a comment and subscribing to the channel. In the world of sports and advertising, nothing is off the table. At your average major league sporting event, advertisements usually find their way into every nook and cranny, as can be seen on players' kits, on the sides of the field of play, actually on the field of play, all around the venue, during replays, in post-game interviews, and even on blimps floating above the ground. You name it, it's probably got an ad on it. In fact, I genuinely believe that if you're watching a major sporting event of any kind, whether on TV or in person, there'll always be an ad somewhere in your line of vision. Why is sport so plagued by advertising? Well, it's quite simple really. Sports is hugely popular. Not only do millions of people watch games on their televisions, but thousands turn up in person to watch games too. It's just copious amounts of people all watching the same thing, an advertiser's paradise. Plus, many sporting events are all about the here and now. It is not often people watch a sports event later on. Usually they are watched live, and live sports often mean people won't turn off the television while the ads are playing, or they won't be able to skip them over like you can when you record a show and watch it later. In a world where on-demand services are more popular and less dependent on advertising, live sports broadcasts are a reminder of an older time where advertisers had viewers in the palm of their hand. In some circumstances, ads have even become an as big deal as the sport itself. Take the Super Bowl halftime ads. In some circles, they're more talked about than the game itself. And of course, even names aren't safe from having ads applied to them in the world of sport. This is most noticeable in the names of the stadiums and arenas and venues in which sport games take place. Most major stadiums you'll see today have a name linked to some sort of product or service. Take the Wells Fargo Center in Philadelphia, named after the bank Wells Fargo, or the Mercedes-Benz Superdome in New Orleans, named after the car make of course. These places aren't named after these brands because the stadium owner loves these brands. These names were purchased. These brands paid to have their names used as the venue's name. This is something known as naming rights, and it's a highly lucrative, though often debated, business. Brands and companies sign multi-year deals worth masses of money just to have their name used as a venue's name. And this of course has led to all kinds of odd, familiar and out-of-place names being slapped onto stadiums and arenas for a quick big buck. Some of these brand names have become so well known and associated with these venues that we kind of forget they are brands in the first place. I even think that some of these names are now more known as the names of these stadiums than they are the names of their respective brands. For me, when I hear the names MetLife and Wrigley, I think of MetLife Stadium in New Jersey and Wrigley Field in Chicago, not a life insurance company or a chewing gum brand, though that might just be because I'm British and these brands are more well known in the USA, especially MetLife. And yes, while these examples have all been from the USA, as that's where naming rights started, this marketing scheme has become a worldwide trend. Here in the UK we have the O2 Arena, named after the phone network O2 in London. Melbourne, Australia's Dockland Stadium now has the sponsorship name of Marvel Stadium. Yes, that Marvel. There's the Level 5 Stadium in Japan, named after the developers of the Professor Layton and Yokai Watch series of games. And in Germany there's the Red Bull Arena, sponsored by the energy drink. Other nations like India are starting to dip their toe into the idea of naming rights too, so don't be surprised if more and more of them pop up. One advertising firm estimates that the English Premier League is missing out on around £100 million of potential revenue from not selling more naming rights. And while many of these names, like I said, seem kind of normal and don't raise an eyebrow, some of them do seem a little more out of place and just a bit tactless in all honesty. There's the KFC Yum Centre, Little Caesars Arena and the Smoothie King Centre, all in the United States. Formerly in the Netherlands we had the Mitsubishi Forklift Stadium, there's Coca-Cola Coliseum in Canada, and here in the UK we have Kit Kat Crescent. I just find names like these ones a bit thoughtless and a bit too in your face with their advertising, but maybe that's just me. Nevertheless, how did we get to a point where stadiums and other sporting venues being named after brands due to having huge sums of money being thrown at them is the norm? Because when you say it like that, it is rather odd. Well, unsurprisingly, this wasn't always the case. Traditionally, most stadiums and venues were named in one of three ways, and luckily we still have some venues named like this. They were either named after the team that called the venue their home, like we see with Yankee Stadium and the New York Yankees, or they were named after where they are, like the Tokyo Dome in, well, Tokyo, or they're named after someone important, like the Limbauer Stadium in Austria, which was formerly named the Arnold Schwarzenegger Stadium, as the stadium is in his hometown. These are all very logical ways of naming a place, and we see other buildings, even towns and cities, named after things like this too. Branded names kind of came into being at the start of the 20th century, though they weren't entirely on purpose. One of the earliest situations of a venue sharing its name with a brand we have is the aforementioned Wrigley's Field in Chicago. To start with, this ballpark was named Cubs Park after the Chicago Cubs, who called it their home. However, this team was bought by William Wrigley Jr. in 1921. This William Wrigley also happened to own the chewing gum brand too, and in 1927 he changed Cub Park's name to Wrigley Field. However, we aren't sure if this name was chosen to promote his gum or he just named it after himself. Like I said, it wasn't entirely on purpose and nothing like how we see naming rights today, when an outside company pays huge amounts to have their name applied to the stadium. This was just a guy naming his venue after himself, which also happened to be the name of his chewing gum brand he owned too. It wouldn't be until 1953 that the first proper instance of naming rights would take place. August Busch Jr., then owner of the Anheuser-Busch Brewery, wanted to buy the naming rights to Sportsman's Park, home of the St. Louis Cardinals. He wanted to rename the stadium Budweiser Park after his famous beer, so the name would of course promote the beer. However, the president of the league at that time, Ford C. Frick, wasn't a big fan of having a stadium named after a beer. While Frick didn't allow August Busch to name the stadium after the beer itself, he allowed him to buy the naming rights and use his family name. This created the name Busch Stadium, which is still used by the St. Louis Cardinals to this day, even if it isn't the same actual venue. August Busch, however, came up with a solution to how they could still use this name for advertising purposes. He couldn't name the stadium after the beer, so he just named the beer after the stadium. Shortly after purchasing the naming rights, the brewery released their new beer called Busch Bavarian, which of course tied in much more neatly with the stadium's name. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to find out how much exactly Busch paid for naming rights, but this was the instance that really got the ball rolling on naming rights. Other companies were seeing the benefits it could bring, and they all wanted a stadium that had their product's name. And these naming rights got more and more expensive, with the first huge deal coming about in 1999, when delivery company FedEx paid a whopping $205 million for a 27-year deal to have the naming rights of the home stadium of the Washington Redskins. And yes, at some point we'll talk about that name too. Today, however, it seems that $100 million is the bare minimum to acquire the naming rights of a stadium. MetLife paid $400 million in a 25-year deal for the naming rights to the MetLife Stadium in 2011. However, it seems the most expensive naming rights so far goes to the Scotiabank Arena in Canada. Scotiabank paid almost 800 million Canadian dollars, about 639 million US, for a 20 years naming rights agreement. That's an insane amount of money. As I said, naming rights is a highly lucrative business. If anyone is interested in naming rights for this channel, please get in touch. Subway Explained has a great ring to it, just saying. However, it must be remembered that this doesn't just affect the stadium or the teams or their management, but their fans too. And if there's one thing that all sports fans have in common, it's passion. Most sports fans have an opinion on pretty much all things relating to their team, how they play, who plays for them, what their kit looks like, and of course what their stadium is called. Different sports fans have different opinions on venues with these sponsored names. I think most find them a little bit silly, but many just accept that these names help finance their team and that they're just an entrenched part of the sports industry by now. You've just got to hope that your team picks a sponsor that isn't too embarrassing. However, many sports fans are more vocal about their dislike of these names. Home stadiums are sacred grounds to many sports fans, so to tarnish them with some naff brand name just seems like a big slap in the face. They can think these sponsored names devalue the stadium, the team, or even the sport as a whole. To many people, sport is their one passion in life, and their team is their church. It would seem pretty disgraceful to have ads in a church. It's like their passion is nothing more than a billboard for the business people and higher ups to earn mega money from. This is especially the case when the sponsored name overtakes a much more beloved historic name. The English football club of Tottenham Hotspurs used to have White Hart Lane as their home ground, a stadium which was beloved by their fans and seen as a second home by many. However, in 2019 they moved to a brand new stadium which is simply called Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. However, many fans simply call this venue New White Hart Lane, but it's been openly stated that the name Tottenham Hotspur Stadium is only temporary, with naming rights up for grabs. I'm sure when a new sponsored name comes into effect, there'll be an uproar. Though even if this place does get a sponsored name, not all hope is lost, as sponsored names aren't quite as universal as I may have been making them out to be. Many stadiums in the English Premier League still have their original, non-sponsored names. This includes the stadiums of some of the EPL's most popular teams, like Chelsea's Stamford Bridge, Liverpool's Anfield, and Manchester United's Old Trafford. I don't really think these beloved names will be going anywhere, as they're just too entrenched and there will be so much anger if they were changed for some tacky brand name instead. Luckily, name recognition sometimes overpowers naming rights. Like, imagine if Madison Square Garden became Madison Olive Garden. And many places have sponsored names put on them, but the masses simply refuse to use them. And as we like to say here on Name Explain, is a name really a name if no one uses it? My favourite example of this comes from WrestleMania 33. This Mania was held in Orlando, Florida in the Camping World Stadium. The former name for this stadium was the Citrus Bowl, and the WWE chairman Vince McMahon thought the name Camping World Stadium was ridiculous, so insisted that commentary and the wrestlers themselves only referred to it by its former name, the Citrus Bowl. Aside from this instance, I'm sure a lot of people in England were refer to the O2 Arena by its original name of the Millennium Dome still, and the popular cricket ground here called the Oval is technically called the Kia Oval as it's sponsored by the car company, but I've never heard anyone use this name. Though naming rights is starting to be applied to more than just stadiums, leagues and competitions have branding names too. One of the tournaments in English football is called the Carabao Cup, named after a Thai energy drink of all things, and the top netball league in the UK is called the Vitality Super League, with Vitality being a health insurance company. There's even been cases of actual sports players changing their names for sponsorship reasons. Snooker player Jimmy White changed his name to James Brown by default to land a deal with brown sauce maker HP Sauce, and Australian rules player Gary Hocking changed his name to Whiskers to sponsor the cat food. This may be ridiculous, but here we are talking about them, so clearly the advertising worked out. And if you haven't guessed from this video, I'm not the biggest sports fan. The closest I get to watching a real sport is listening to the Athletico Mints podcast, and I only know most of these stadiums and arenas because of WWE. So if you're into a sport of any kind, please do let me know what you think about these naming rights, and if your team's home ground has a sponsored name and if you like it or not. But what if naming rights expand to outside the world of sport, and other buildings, towns, landmarks and even nations start giving their naming rights away to the highest bidder too? Suddenly on our planet we'll have places like the Sprite House, Mini Appleless, the Brandenburg Colgate, and even the entire nation of Poland Rover Discovery. Luckily for now, however, naming rights seem to only apply to sports arenas and stadiums. Sports arenas was suggested by Kyle, and thanks to their suggestion, they will now be honoured as Name Explain's patron saint of sports arenas. Do you have a good idea for somewhere that's name could be covered in a Name Explain video? If so, then please consider donating on Patreon. Just $1 a month helps keep the channel running and earns you a weekly chance to suggest somewhere to be turned into a video, and you too could be a Name Explain Patreon saint. Thank you to all my patrons who support Name Explain on a monthly basis. Patreon is vital to Name Explain, and donating just $2 a month allows you to enjoy ad-free videos and bonus Patreon exclusive content. It also allows you to help choose what names get explained in upcoming videos, and it gets your name here with all these awesome people. Thank you so much for all the support you guys give Name Explain. Hello all, and thank you so much for reaching the end of the video. Check out another video and subscribe to stay in the loop on all things Name Explain. You can find me on Twitter where I'm at NameExplainYT, on Instagram I'm also NameExplainYT, and on Facebook just search Name Explain. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and once again thank you all so much.